My name is Xian, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of CapBay. I come from a small fishing village just 90 minutes away from here across the border in Malaysia. For some funny reason, people call me Along Kiang. Actually, that means, for some of you, you know, but that means mini loan shark in the local dialect here. It's just coincidence, but it's therefore no surprise that I run a lending business. CapBay is a leading fintech specializing in supply chain finance. We provide financing to small businesses via our award-winning P2P and multi-bank supply chain finance platform. So despite my parents' constant struggle when I was young, I received good education thanks to them. So in terms of personal progress, I always feel like I managed to measure it because I could see the improvement I made in terms of exam score, improving from like primary school, secondary school, all the way to university. I could also see it through the scholarship that I received and the good university that I entered to. So it was very clear to see that progress. But the sense of progress was totally messed up when I started my company, CapBay. And that brings me to the focal point of my story today. From the very get-go, I had to personally face the questions each day whether I'm making enough progress or whether the progress is fast enough. There is no more examination to pass, there's very little benchmark to refer to, right? So it's very easy for me to feel totally stressed out and more importantly, not knowing that we are going at the most optimal speed at any one point. I'm sure many of you may have faced a similar conundrum, especially if you are an entrepreneur too. As entrepreneurs, we start our company on a vision which is usually very far, distant, and ambitious. So all of these make measuring progress very, very hard. Occasionally, we may bump into some setbacks, and we would question ourselves even further. How we wish that our growth is just like the typical nice growth curve line towards the upper right corner that we are so used to seeing that in many other pitch decks, right? But I think over time, we figure out a few things about progress, about how to measure it, about falling forward, and I would like to share that with you today. Number one, progress is rarely linear and smooth. It is actually very rare that progress can be expressed in the consistent month-on-month growth that we usually hear from others. In fact, I think most of the time, progress comes from a few measured periods of growth and occasional breakthrough, and I just name it an elevator period. So when we first started, my co-founders and I, we put together about $100,000 from our corporate job savings. And our goal was to disrupt the banking industry, and that's what actually we attempted to do. So we told ourselves, we got to grow at 15% each month so that after 36 months, we will hit a 15 million new loan target disbursement. So it was a very simplistic way of thinking about it. So each month we struggled to think about how to find more borrowers, more investors, and of course, soon we hit a wall. So for us, one of the elevator periods came when we realized that we didn't have to go for the banks, disrupting them from the get-go. We actually should try disrupting the traditional invoice factoring companies instead, because I feel that at that point, they invested too little in technology. Hence, during the COVID period, that worked well for us when the traditional players were all suffering with the more old-school underwriting approach. We capitalized on the technological advantage as well as our nimbleness to adapt. So within 2 years, we managed to become the top non-bank invoice financing players in the country, taking market share from many of them. And of course, because of this elevated period, we managed to surpass our target of 15 million new loan target each month. Number two, between these so-called high growth elevated periods, we should all be prepared to be painfully grind forward and very often fall forward. As a young team, we knew nothing about lending business as a start. None of us came from a lending background. So we actually learned by giving loans to strangers that we found online. So of course, the result would be not great. But each time our loan goes into a code red, as we call it, our entire team had to drop everything on hands, sacrifice much of our sleep, just to get our money back, and thankfully we did each time. Despite the pain, we still kept on putting our money at risk, our initial capital at risk, lending it out because we felt that, or we knew that that was a great way, and in fact, the only way to truly test out our credit underwriting approach and our collection hypothesis. In short, we made a conscious decision to keep on falling forward. Looking back, we think that we are very fortunate enough to have many of these early harsh lessons. As a result, we have been able to avoid very costly mistakes as we have grown many times larger nowadays. And I would say that CapBay has a much better risk management process because of all these early lessons that we have been through. Number 3, when it comes to measuring progress, we've got to measure it the right way and have the correct measurement. It was 2 years after CapBay started, and that year, right before COVID, and that year we experienced fairly low growth, measured in terms of the traditional financial KPI, such as new loan disbursement. And this was because of our decision to improvise our risk model before we further expand our loan book. Because we asked ourselves, right, after all, it is really not that easy to give out money, right? The real challenges came from coming up with more smarter risk management approach powered by innovation. And without all this, if we were to go on and expand our loan book, we merely just have expanded our risk, and that's not a smart thing to do. So all these things sounds like a very simple principle, but actually it's not that easy to carry it out. Because of what? Because we have to resist what we call a perceived progress, a temptation of a perceived progress. Pressure from investors, external investors were very high. Our competitors were growing very fast, and it definitely seemed like we were falling behind. So we built the mental resilience by devising a different measure for ourselves, by asking ourselves, what do we really need to do? So we decided that our real specific role in the market, in the world, is actually not so much just about channeling more money to small businesses, but it is actually about building the financing infrastructure of tomorrow to enable smarter and more inclusive financing to businesses. So our role is an enabler. And this eventually became the mission statement for CapBay, and we have been measuring our progress ever since. As it turned out, despite not using the traditional financial metrics, we came out of the COVID pandemic with very little bad loans on our book, and also came up a lot stronger financially. Finally, number 4, it is actually not just about measuring forward, but measuring backwards is equally important. All of us are very used to measuring forward because that is just how we were taught. So we set goals, we plan for milestones, we tell ourselves that we want to grow our revenue 10 times every 2 years. So that's great, right? The issue is that we, or any entrepreneurs, myself included, like to set very high bars for ourselves. So therefore, we end up usually measuring the shortfall rather than the progress we have made. So that's actually very depressing. And yet, we constantly tell ourselves that we got to shoot for the moon, because even if we fail, we will at least land among the stars. However, I think it's actually more important to measure backwards. In this case, we look at what we have achieved instead of focusing on the shortfall. We get to enjoy the progress, and we get a lot of insights on what actually made things work. And that also allows us to focus on our strength. Interestingly, when I measure backwards long enough, the growth curve of CapBay does look like the curved line towards the upper right corner. And everything else just became the small kinks on the curve. And I hope this serves as a constant reminder for me personally, and hopefully for everyone else, that no matter how big the challenge we face today, when we look back eventually, it is nothing more than the small kinks on that curve. Thank you very much for your time. Have a good day.